The magnificent rise and tragic fall of San Francisco's Sutro Baths. When people envision San Francisco today, certain images immediately come to mind. Steep streets lined with Victorian houses, cable cars climbing impossible inclines, or the iconic Golden Gate Bridge emerging from thick fog banks. Yet before these became the city's defining symbols, another attraction captivated visitors and locals alike, a place so extraordinary in scale and ambition that it seemed almost fantastical. This marvel was known as the Sutro Baths. At its peak, the Sutro Baths held the title of the world's largest indoor swimming facility, but calling it merely a swimming facility fails to capture its true essence. This was an architectural wonder constructed from glass, iron, and seawater, a glittering palace stretching along the coastline where the Pacific Ocean met the rocky shore. To working-class families, laborers, and children of the era, entering the Sutro Baths meant stepping into a realm of possibility and escape from the harsh realities of daily existence. Today, visitors to the area near the Cliff House encounter only fragments of this former glory. Crumbling concrete, weathered staircases leading nowhere, and moss-covered stone ruins are all that remain. The Pacific's waves echo through vacant spaces where thousands once gathered to swim, play, and celebrate. These haunting remains seem to guard forgotten stories, prompting visitors to wonder, how did something so immense and beloved vanish so completely? To answer this question requires traveling back over 150 years to an era of extraordinary transformation, the California gold rush of the mid-1800s, when fortune seekers from across the globe descended upon the region with dreams of instant wealth. Among these hopeful arrivals was a man whose vision would prove even more ambitious than his contemporaries, Adolf Heinrich Joseph Sutro. The visionary arrives. In 1850, a vessel carrying German immigrant Adolf Sutro docked in California. Unlike most passengers aboard, Sutro wasn't a prospector chasing gold or a gambler seeking quick riches. Born in Prussia, Sutro had studied mining engineering and business principles. He understood machinery, ventilation systems, and tunnel construction. His mind brimmed with ambitious concepts, and he believed his technical knowledge could solve practical problems rather than simply extracting precious metals. While thousands rushed into the mountains with basic tools and unrealistic expectations, Sutro observed the mining industry from a different perspective. He recognized the extreme dangers these workers confronted daily. 19th-century mines were death traps. Underground passages frequently flooded. Toxic gases accumulated in enclosed spaces. Fires and explosions erupted without warning. When miners became trapped below ground, survival odds were minimal. Sutro believed he possessed the solution. During the 1860s, he traveled to Nevada, home of the legendary Comstock Lode, one of the world's richest silver deposits. There he proposed an audacious plan, constructing a massive tunnel deep underground to drain water, ventilate toxic gases, and provide fresh air circulation for miners. This engineering project would extend thousands of feet through solid rock. Most people considered Sutro's proposal absurd, prohibitively expensive, and technically impossible. But Sutro remained undeterred. He spent years attempting to convince investors to fund his project. They remained skeptical until catastrophe struck. In 1869, a devastating explosion and fire tore through the Yellow Jacket mine, claiming 35 lives. This tragedy exposed the mining industry's brutal dangers. Suddenly, Sutro's tunnel seemed less like fantasy and more like salvation. Investors reconsidered. Workers believed in his vision. Gradually, financial backing materialized. Sutro established the Sutro Tunnel Company and raised capital through share sales. Construction commenced, and for years, laborers blasted, dug, and carved through darkness. The work proved dangerous, tedious, and plagued with setbacks. But Sutro never wavered. Finally, in 1878, the remarkable tunnel was completed, stretching 600 feet in length, 10 feet wide, and reaching nearly 600 feet below the surface. The tunnel revolutionized mining operations. It enhanced safety and enabled deeper excavation. Sutro's stubborn persistence had succeeded, making him considerably wealthier than the average miner who risked everything underground. However, wealth wasn't Sutro's ultimate objective. Unlike many affluent men of his time, he didn't hoard his success or build exclusive estates. He wanted to create something the general public could enjoy, something that would bring happiness, education, and beauty to ordinary citizens. A city builder's vision. When Adolf Sutro returned to San Francisco during the 1880s, retirement didn't interest him. Instead, he began acquiring property throughout the city, so much land that some estimated he eventually owned 1/12 of all San Francisco. His most famous acquisition sat perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. On 20 acres of land, high above where waves crashed against rocks, he created Sutro Heights, a public garden unlike anything the city had witnessed. The garden featured exotic plants, colorful blooms, intricate statues, and winding paths through tranquil greenery. A lookout tower allowed visitors to climb and view panoramic vistas of the ocean, coastline, and distant city skyline. What distinguished Sutro from other wealthy landowners was simple. He believed ordinary people deserved equal access to beauty as the privileged classes. Rather than maintaining private gardens, he opened them to everyone for a modest, affordable fee. Working-class families living in cramped neighborhoods could wander through peaceful gardens and experience a completely different world. This philosophy, democratizing luxury, became central to Sutro's legacy. In 1883, he purchased the iconic Cliff House, a restaurant dramatically positioned at the cliff's edge. After fire partially destroyed it, he rebuilt the structure on an even grander scale. Yet even the Cliff House wasn't the masterpiece Sutro envisioned. Below the cliffs, hidden in a rocky cove, he saw potential where others saw only obstacles. While others observed difficult terrain, battered by waves, Sutro saw opportunity. Initially, he imagined creating an aquarium where people could observe marine creatures up close. But the idea expanded. The aquarium concept evolved into plans for a promenade. Then it became a hotel proposal. Eventually, it transformed into something extraordinary, a gigantic public bathing palace inspired by ancient Roman baths, the birth of a monument. Public bathhouses were gaining popularity in America and Europe during this period. Some were simple pools, others were more elegant, but most catered primarily to wealthy patrons. Adolf Sutro rejected this model. His bathhouse would welcome everyone, rich or poor, local or visitor, young or old. In 1888, Sutro announced a design competition offering $500, a substantial sum then, to the winning architects. The winners were C.J. Colley and Emile S. Lemmy, the same architects who had helped rebuild the second Cliff House. What they designed, guided by Sutro's imagination, was extraordinary. This wasn't merely a pool, it was a monument, a palace, an engineering miracle constructed where land and water constantly battled. Building the impossible. Construction of the Sutro Baths began in the early 1890s, and for most San Franciscans, the project seemed unbelievable. The cove where Adolf Sutro planned to place his enormous glass palace wasn't peaceful or convenient. It was a wild, rocky pocket of coastline constantly pounded by ocean waves. High tides swept in with tremendous force. Low tides left behind slippery seaweed and stone piles. Few engineers would have dared build anything there, but Adolf Sutro had already accomplished engineering feats deep beneath the earth. He had constructed a tunnel once deemed impossible. Controlling the Pacific Ocean, at least in one small cove, excited rather than intimidated him. To realize his vision, Sutro and his workers designed an elaborate underground system to manage ocean water. They carved passageways and tunnels into the rock beneath the cliffs. These tunnels were engineered so waves could rush in during high tide and naturally fill the pools with millions of gallons of fresh salt water. When tides dropped too low, giant pumps moving 6,000 gallons per minute kept the pools full. This wasn't merely clever engineering, it was genius. Without these systems, the baths would have been impossible. The ocean itself became the facility's heart, filling, refreshing, and cleaning the pools. Still, challenges persisted. The foundation required enormous strength to withstand constant wave pounding and storms. Workers transported tons of rock to stabilize the structure. They even built tracks inside a nearby cave to move stone from local quarries. Cart after cart rolled through darkness, delivering materials needed to create the massive base. Then came the breakwater, a huge wall constructed of rock and concrete standing between the baths and the open ocean. Without it, one large wave could have demolished the structure. With it, the building could withstand the Pacific's power. Even so, the breakwater required constant repairs. Nature never stopped testing Sutro's creation. Finally, the main building rose, a glass palace by the sea. When construction was completed, people could hardly believe their eyes. Covering 3 acres, the Sutro Baths were unlike anything America had witnessed. The roof was made of glass. Massive iron arches lifted glass sheets high into the air so sunlight could flood inside. When the sun hit the structure properly, the entire building shimmered like crystal. From a distance, it resembled a dream rising from ocean mist. Inside, light filtered through glass, bouncing off pools and dancing across walls. The whole place felt warm, bright and alive, even when outside weather was chilly or foggy. First-time visitors often stopped in complete amazement. The sound of waves echoed faintly from beneath the structure. The salty ocean smell blended with warm air from heated pools. It felt like a magical fusion of nature and human innovation. The details were stunning. 7 swimming pools were arranged in descending steps, flowing naturally toward the ocean. 6 pools contained filtered salt water, each at different temperatures. Some were cool and refreshing, others pleasantly warm, and one single pool contained fresh water for those preferring a different experience. Around the pools, dozens of staircases twisted and climbed up to balconies and walkways. Floors gleamed. Metal beams overhead arched gracefully like the interior of a giant ship. Everywhere, people laughed, splashed, ran, or simply sat, soaking in the atmosphere. The Sutro Baths weren't just big, they were breathtaking. A playground for all. Inside the Sutro Baths, possibilities seemed endless. Diving boards launched people into the air. Water slides curved into pools. Trapezes hung above the water where brave swimmers could swing and drop into pools below. Some pools featured floating platforms and trampolines. For visitors not wishing to swim, there was equally much to enjoy. A wide promenade wrapped around the pools, providing a perfect place to stroll and people watch. Families walked arm in arm. Teenagers gathered with friends. Older adults sat on benches enjoying the warmth inside the enormous glass building. Then there was the museum, perhaps the most surprising element of all. Adolf Sutro had traveled worldwide, and everywhere he went, he collected fascinating objects. Rather than keeping them in a private mansion, he displayed them in the baths. The museum showcased Egyptian mummies, taxidermied animals, rare plants, unusual stones, scientific specimens, and cultural artifacts from dozens of places. Visitors could spend hours wandering the exhibits before swimming. Besides the museum, Sutro included 500 private dressing rooms, a 700-seat amphitheater for competitions and special events, club rooms for large gatherings, and restaurants serving meals so visitors could stay all day. It was part swimming center, part museum, part amusement hall, and part community gathering space. And the best part, it was affordable. Sutro believed deeply in making luxury accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. The streetcar ride to the baths cost 5 cents, and admission to swim cost 25 cents. That was low enough for almost anyone to afford, even families struggling financially. On opening day in 1896, the Sutro Baths were packed with thousands of excited visitors. Newspapers described the scene with glowing praise. For working families living in crowded neighborhoods or difficult conditions, the baths were like entering a magical palace. Everything felt grand, clean, and full of opportunity. Many families said visiting the Sutro Baths became one of the happiest memories of their childhoods. In interviews, Adolf Sutro often claimed that even the baths of ancient Rome, famous for their luxury, couldn't compare to what he had created. In many ways, he was right. No other bathhouse worldwide combined engineering, art, science, recreation, and community the way Sutro did. To Sutro, this wasn't simply entertainment. It was, as he called it, health-giving amusement. A place where bodies became stronger, minds became brighter, and spirits became lighter. A sudden change after Sutro's death. But something changed very quickly. In 1898, only 2 years after the Sutro Baths opened, Adolf Sutro passed away. The dreamer who had imagined the impossible fought through years of challenges and spent his personal fortune to give the public a place of wonder was suddenly gone. His heirs inherited the baths, the cliff house, the gardens, and the land. But they didn't possess his passion, his engineering mind, or his ability to operate such a massive and expensive facility. Keeping the baths open became an immediate struggle. The building was huge. Everything required constant repair. The furnaces heating the pools, the pumps moving salt water, the glass cracking in storms, the wood and metal wearing out over time. The ocean never rested, and that meant neither could the owners. To attract guests and generate income, Sutro's family organized events. They hosted swimming competitions, circus-style performances, and even beauty pageants. Sometimes it worked. In 1913 and 1914, the baths gained national attention when champion swimmers from Hawaii broke world records there. For a brief while, the spotlight returned. But problems waited around the corner. World War I changed the nation. People struggled through difficult times, and recreation wasn't a priority. Then came the Great Depression of the 1930s, one of the darkest financial periods in American history. Families barely had enough money for basic needs, and leisure activities were cut from budgets. The Sutro Baths, once packed with thousands, now stood partly empty, and the costs continued rising. The building wasn't just large, it was too large. No matter how many visitors came, it never seemed to bring in enough money to cover its enormous expenses. The baths were slowly becoming a financial burden, and this was only the beginning of their long decline. Reinvention and struggle. As the 1930s arrived, the Sutro Baths stood at a crossroads. The once brilliant palace of glass and water was struggling to survive. The building was still massive and impressive, but its glory was fading. The constant repairs, the cost of heating pools, and the never-ending war with the ocean were draining the owner's finances. If something didn't change soon, the baths would shut down completely. It was during this difficult period that Adolf G. Sutro, the grandson of Adolf Sutro, stepped forward with a bold plan. He wanted to revive the baths by transforming them into something new, something that could capture the imagination of modern visitors. He believed people wanted more than just swimming pools. They wanted entertainment, excitement, and variety. The renovation started with removing several original pools. These saltwater pools had been the complex's heart, but they required constant pumping, heating, and cleaning. Instead of maintaining them, Adolf G. Sutro replaced them with new attractions: basketball courts, dance floors, and spaces for different events. He even added an indoor beach complete with sand right inside the building. Workers trucked in loads of sand from real beaches and spread it across a large floor section. Visitors could walk barefoot across warm sand without ever stepping outside. If swimming alone wasn't enough to bring crowds, then variety might. He wanted to offer something for everyone, regardless of age or interests. The remodeled building now offered basketball games, dancing areas, exhibitions and special events, the famous indoor beach, and public gatherings and festivals. For a short time, his plan seemed to work. Attendance picked up. Families returned. Events drew crowds. People who lived in San Francisco during the 1930s and 1940s remembered the baths not just as a swimming center, but as a lively social space filled with music, games, and community gatherings. But underneath the excitement, the problems hadn't disappeared. They were only hidden temporarily. A building too big to save. The biggest issue remained simply the size of the Sutro Baths. The building was almost unbelievably large. Just heating the water for the pools took enormous amounts of energy. Maintaining the glass roof required constant attention. The ocean continued battering the walls, threatening the structure during every major storm. The furnaces, pipes, and pumps were aging and needed constant repair. Operating the complex cost far more money than it earned. Even though the new attractions brought in more people, income still couldn't keep up with expenses. And as time went on, fewer families came. The country faced wars, economic challenges, and major cultural changes. The younger generation found new forms of entertainment. Ice skating rinks, movie theaters, and nightclubs grew in popularity. The glowing magic of the Sutro Baths began feeling old-fashioned. By 1952, the situation was dire. The owners could barely keep the doors open. The structure was worn down. The salt water had corroded metal beams. Parts of the building required expensive repairs. The heating systems were breaking. The floors needed work. Everything demanded attention, and the money simply wasn't there. It seemed as though the Sutro Baths, once a symbol of hope, imagination, and joy, were about to fade away forever. And then, at the last possible moment, a lifeline appeared. A new owner, a new hope. In 1952, the baths were purchased by George Whitney, a well-known businessman who owned the famous Playland amusement park nearby and the Cliff House. Whitney was an energetic, optimistic entrepreneur who believed entertainment should be accessible and fun. He had a talent for turning old attractions into successful businesses. Whitney had a bold idea to save the Sutro Baths. Instead of trying to keep the pools running, which had proven far too expensive, he converted the remaining space into a giant ice skating rink. Ice rinks were becoming very trendy in the 1950s, and Whitney believed the baths could thrive if they offered something fresh and appealing. And he was right. The new ice rink became a hit. Families came for weekend skating, couples went for date nights. Teenagers flocked there with friends. Skaters glided across the ice to bright music echoing throughout the huge building. For a while, it felt as though the Sutro Baths had come back to life, but this revival didn't last forever. The slow decline. When George Whitney died, his family inherited his properties. Unlike Whitney, they weren't eager to operate large entertainment complexes. The land around the baths had become incredibly valuable, and real estate developers were eager to purchase it. One by one, the Whitneys sold pieces of the property. Soon, developers began considering big plans for the site. They imagined high-rise condominiums, shopping centers, and modern buildings that would bring in huge profits. The ruins of the baths were old-fashioned, costly, and difficult to manage. In the eyes of the new owners, the historic structure didn't fit the future they wanted. By the early 1960s, the decision had been made. The Sutro Baths would be demolished. The iconic glass palace, the grand pools, and the historic structure would be torn down. In their place, modern developments would rise. The era of the Sutro Baths was coming to a close. But before demolition could begin, something unexpected and devastating happened. Fire on the Pacific. On June 26, 1966, a massive fire broke out inside the Sutro Baths. Flames spread quickly through the wooden portions of the old structure. The fire grew hotter and hotter until it exploded through the building. Metal beams twisted, glass shattered, smoke billowed across the coastline. Crowds gathered on nearby cliffs, watching as the once glorious palace burned. Within hours, the building was destroyed. The fire was later declared arson, meaning someone had set it on purpose. Many people suspected it had been burned to clear the land more easily or to collect insurance money, but no one was ever arrested and no one ever confessed. To this day, the cause of the fire remains a mystery, adding to the haunting history of the site. What had once been the largest indoor swimming complex in the world, the pride of Adolf Sutro, was now nothing more than a pile of smouldering ruins. The developers gave up. The land sat empty. The ocean wind blew across the remains, eroding them piece by piece. Rain filled the old pools. Crabs scuttled across the stones. What had been a lively, joyful place was now quiet and ghostly. The glory was gone. But the story was not over. Ruins, rediscovery, and legacy. In the years after the devastating 1966 fire, the Sutro Baths no longer resembled the shimmering palace they once were. Without its glass roof, without the warm glow of sunlight entering the vast interior, and without laughter echoing through its halls, the building slowly faded into the landscape. The tides rolled in and out of the remains, washing over broken concrete and rusted metal. Developers who once planned grand construction projects lost interest after the fire. The idea of building condominiums or a shopping center on the unstable, ocean-beaten cliffs became too risky, and the cost of clearing the ruins was far more expensive than anyone wanted to pay. Over time, the charred pieces of the building were left untouched, allowing the sea and weather to continue their slow work. Visitors who wandered to the site found an eerie, almost otherworldly scene: staircases leading nowhere, dark pools filled with green water, and skeleton-like remains of walls standing at crooked angles. What had once been one of San Francisco's most joyful places now looked like a forgotten world swallowed by the coast. And yet, strangely, the ruins attracted people. Lots of people. A landscape reclaimed by nature. As years passed, nature began weaving itself through the ruins. Moss grew thick on stones. Wild plants sprouted from cracks in cement. Birds perched on old beams. Waves crashed rhythmically into the lower pools, filling them with foamy water every time the tide rose. The rusted metal beams, once bright and strong, now curved and bent like silent sculptures. For many visitors, the site felt like stepping into a real-life time capsule, the remains of a massive dream slowly being reclaimed by the natural world. On foggy days, mist drifted between the broken foundations, giving the ruins a mysterious and almost magical atmosphere. Some people described it as peaceful, others found it haunting. Children climbed along the edges of pools. Teenagers explored the tunnels and rocky pathways. Artists, photographers, and writers were drawn to the site because of its dramatic, moody beauty. Every piece of concrete seemed to tell a story about glory that once existed. Every fallen beam whispered memories of the thousands who had walked through the baths during its prime. Even though the grand structure was gone, the presence of Adolf Sutro's imagination still lingered in the air. A place worth saving. By the late 1970s, the ruins of the Sutro Baths had become a beloved landmark, not because of their size or luxury, but because of what they represented: the rise and fall of a dream, the power of nature, and the history of San Francisco itself. Recognizing the site's importance, The National Park Service stepped in. In 1980, the land surrounding the baths was purchased and added to the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, a huge network of parks and protected lands along the coast. This decision ensured that the remains of the Sutro Baths would be preserved instead of being bulldozed or developed. This was a turning point in the baths story. After decades of decline, the site was finally protected. Workers cleared dangerous debris, stabilized walking paths, and created safe areas for visitors to explore. The ruins became part of a larger trail system connected to the Land's End area and the historic Cliff House. Artifacts from the baths, especially items from Sutro's museum collection, were moved to San Francisco State University, where they are now stored, studied and preserved. Some pieces, like ancient artworks and geological specimens, had survived fires and storms, making them valuable windows into both history and Sutro's personal interests. Today, the site is open year-round, and anyone can wander through the remains of the baths at their own pace, walking through the ghost of a wonder. Modern visitors who explore the Sutro Baths often describe the experience as both beautiful and emotional. The moment you step onto the pathway overlooking the ruins, the view can take your breath away. The Pacific Ocean stretches endlessly in front of you, its waves pounding against the rocks. Wind sweeps across the cliffs, carrying the scent of salt and blooming coastal plants. Down below, the skeleton of the Sutro Baths rests quietly. People walk along the concrete edges of what used to be the pools. They stand on the old foundations and stare into the murky water where swimmers once dove. Some visitors sit on the ruins in silence, imagining the bright lights, warm air, and lively crowds that once filled the space. Others bring cameras to capture the dramatic mix of nature and history. It's common for visitors to ask, how was something this huge ever built? And how could something so grand completely disappear? Those questions often lead people to learn about Adolf Sutro, the engineer, entrepreneur, and dreamer who changed San Francisco forever. The baths, even in ruin, have a power that's hard to describe. It's as if the entire site still carries the memory of its past, the cheers from swimming competitions, the clatter of diving boards, the hum of heating pipes, the laughter of families, and the quiet pride of the man who built it all. Even though the glass palace is gone, the echo of its spirit remains, a reflection of San Francisco's soul. The story of the Sutro Baths is much larger than a tale about a swimming complex. It reflects something deeper about San Francisco itself. The baths symbolize ambition, the boldness to dream big, innovation, using engineering to battle nature, community, creating beauty for ordinary people, change, facing challenges, and adapting, loss, the disappearance of something once loved, memory, how stories remain even when buildings don't. San Francisco is a city shaped by daring ideas, by people who dream beyond what seems possible. Adolf Sutro embodied that spirit. He built gardens, a magnificent restaurant, a tunnel that saved miners' lives, and a glass palace that welcomed people from all backgrounds. But the city is also a place of constant transformation. Fires, earthquakes, economic hardships, and shifting tastes have erased many historic landmarks. The Sutro Baths became one of these lost giants, a reminder that even the greatest structures can vanish. And yet, in their loss, they gained something new. The ruins became an open-air museum, a place of imagination, a landmark that encourages people to look back in time and wonder about what once stood there. Why the ruins still matter. Even though the baths are long gone, people continue to visit because the ruins tell a powerful story. They show what one person's imagination can create. They show how nature eventually reclaims everything. They show how communities change, grow, and move forward. Standing among the ruins, you can hear the waves crash loudly against the rocks, just as they did more than a century ago. If you listen closely, you can almost picture the sound of children splashing, teenagers daring each other on trapezes, and visitors walking along the promenade. You can imagine the warm glow of sunlight shining through the glass roof. You can see the shadows of swimmers diving into the cool, saltwater pools. The Sutro Baths may be gone, but the memories and images they inspire are still alive. Many people say that walking through the ruins feels like reading a story written in stone. One chapter rising with hope, one filled with triumph, one shadowed by struggle, and one marked by loss. But the final chapter is still being written by every person who visits. Each visitor becomes part of the living memory of the Sutro Baths. What the Sutro Baths teach us today. The Sutro Baths story, from their rise to their fall, is more than just a tale about a magnificent building. It's a story about people, about dreamers, workers, families, and the city that surrounded them. Today, the ruins stand quietly beside the ocean, shaped by over a century of wind and waves. But even in silence, they continue to speak. They remind us that history isn't just found in museums or dusty books. Sometimes it sits out in the open, waiting for us to explore it. Visitors walking through the ruins often pause and stare out at the Pacific. Some see only broken, weathered concrete, but others see something more. An echo of joy, laughter, and excitement from long ago. The meaning behind the ruins teaches us several lessons. Dreams can shape a city. One person's creativity can transform a landscape. Luxury can be shared. Beauty and culture should be accessible to all. Nature always has the last word. Even the strongest human creations cannot last forever. History is fragile. Grand achievements can vanish quickly if not protected. Memories can outlive monuments. Sometimes stories last longer than stone or steel. A tribute to a dreamer. No story of the Sutro Baths is complete without remembering the man behind them, Adolf Sutro. He arrived in America with little money but enormous ambition. He solved mining problems that others thought impossible. He became rich but never forgot ordinary people. He bought land, built gardens, rebuilt the Cliff House, and opened his home to the public. And he created the greatest bathhouse the world had ever seen. His death marked the beginning of the baths' decline, but his vision continues to inspire. The gardens of Sutro Heights, the Cliff House, and the ruins of the baths all carry pieces of his legacy. These places remind people of his belief that beauty belongs to everyone, not just a few. If Sutro were alive today, he would likely be proud that people still visit the ruins, still wonder about his invention, and still appreciate the spirit behind his work. The final reflection. As the sun sets over the Pacific Ocean, the ruins of the Sutro Baths turn golden in the fading light. Waves crash into the pools, washing over stones that have survived storms, fires, and decades of change. Visitors stand quietly, watching the ocean sparkle. Some take photos, some sit on the rocks and breathe in the salty air. Some listen to the roar of the waves and imagine the sound of splashing water from years ago. It's easy to picture the baths glowing under the glass roof, filled with movement, laughter, and life. It's easy to imagine Adolf Sutro standing proudly on a balcony, watching families enjoy the place he created for them. The baths may be gone, but the feelings they inspired haven't disappeared. They live on in the memories of the city, in the stories passed down, and in the people who explore the ruins today. The rise and fall of the Sutro Baths teaches us that history is alive. It changes, it breathes, it grows and fades. But as long as someone remembers, as long as someone walks the paths where thousands once walked, the story continues. The Sutro Baths began as a dream built on imagination, engineering, and hope. They rose from a rocky cove to become one of the greatest public attractions in America. They brought joy to thousands. They battled the ocean and survived fires, storms, and economic hardships. And even though they eventually fell into ruin, their spirit lives on. Today, the ruins stand as a reminder that even the most incredible creations can fade, but the dreams behind them never truly vanish. They stay alive in the hearts of those who visit, those who learn, and those who imagine what once was. Standing on the cliffs looking out over the Pacific, you can almost hear faint echoes of laughter, splashing, music, and joy. And in that moment, you realize something powerful. The Sutro Baths may have crumbled, but their story will never be forgotten.